Hey guys, this is Jay Calderon with Jay Unboxing here, giving you a personal prediction for Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano. And as always, this is just my personal take. Yours, of course, we left down in the comments section below. Would love to hear them all. A little bit of fight info here. We have Taylor versus Serrano, which is taking place at the world-famous Madison Square Garden in New York City, airing live on DAZN with Taylor's ring, IBF, WBA, WBC, and WBO lightweight titles on the line. And without being hyperbolic here, this is perhaps one of the biggest female fights in the history of the sport, maybe a top 3, top 5 in terms of its historical significance and the fighters involved, with perhaps 2 of the best female fighters of all time involved as well. But more than that, it's just a damn good fight. You have Taylor, skilled, slightly bigger, at least naturally it would seem, and with her gold on the line in this particular case against Serrano, who perhaps is the more accomplished, maybe the most accomplished women fighter in terms of picking up gold especially, ready for the biggest win of her career, really both of them, and she's having to move up in this case to do it, but perhaps the bigger puncher against maybe the busier hands of Taylor. So a very interesting styles clash as well, with both fighters having their own kind of unique qualities. And with everything on the line at MSG, you have such a good story leading into this fight as well, with these 2 females looking to headline that historic building. So, without much more rambling here, we're just going to get into this breakdown, so let's get that going. Starting with Taylor here. For Taylor to win, I think she needs to land something meaningful early. Serrano's a fighter that likes to come forward, likes to put some pressure on you, is going to look to land something hurtful of her own. If you're Taylor, to really kind of set the pace or the tempo of this fight, you're going to need to land something early that perhaps begins to shut some of that down. It doesn't even necessarily need to put Serrano down or hurt her necessarily to the point where she's wobbled or stunned, but certainly needs to be something serious enough that it at least gives Serrano something to think about. If she's having to think before stepping in, that's already a benefit for you if you're Taylor, and it can allow for you to get some of your work done in the meantime and potentially pick up some points and win some rounds early in the contest. I would also say get in and get out. You don't want to necessarily be too much in those kind of trenches with Serrano, who I do happen to think is probably the bigger puncher of the 2, even with Serrano moving up. You just don't want to give her a lot of shots, or a lot of chances rather, to load up on those shots and put something hurtful on you. So when you're in there, let your hands go. You have some quick combinations, keep them nice and tight and clean, and then get out. And when you're getting out, and if perhaps she's coming forward, walk her into some shots. You just don't want to stay stagnant where it becomes that phone booth fight where, in my opinion, that probably favors Serrano. And finally for Taylor, I would say angles, angles, angle. Again, you don't want to be on the move the entire fight. You want to get her respect, perhaps, like I said, early on, and you're certainly going to have to stand your ground and fight her at some point or another. But when you are moving, you want to make sure that it's through those kinds of angles where you're stepping to the side and not straight back. You're not letting her bulldoze you or push you up against those ropes, get you in those corners. You're going to want to make sure that you're using those angles as your escape routes when you are backing up. And even when you're coming in, don't come in on such straight lines. Use that head movement. Give her things where she has to think before she's throwing, and at the very least, even if she's tagging you, it's not with full force, so that you can get some of your work going, or so you can get out of harm's way if you're looking, like I said, to get in and out of that range in the first place. Now, for Serrano to win, I think you need to throw those combinations. Now, it doesn't mean you throw them with reckless abandon. It doesn't mean that you do it from bell to bell necessarily. You want to work your way in and make sure that you're doing so behind a decent jab and some head movement, and that you're, cutting off the ring correctly and not just following and chasing. That being said, when you do get in that range, it's about giving yourself the most chances to put some hurt on Taylor. And that, in my opinion, means by putting more combinations together, giving yourself better shots. If you're just loading up and looking to chase, one might land and you might tag her. But if you're just letting your hands go a little bit more, putting some of the force that you naturally have in your punches behind those shots to begin with, I think you give yourself the best chance to hurt Taylor if you're Serrano. I would also say step in with the left hand. As a southpaw, you're going to have that left hand and that look, I should say, of a left-hander that can potentially throw some opponents off. But what can really cause some great success for you is by just leading with that left hand and stepping in when you do. Stepping in, especially if you cut off the lead foot of Taylor, will potentially corner her and lead her into that shot a bit more. But it also just stuns them and surprises them because you're not jabbing, you're not setting it up all the time. You're just throwing it right away and kind of giving them some new looks. Then when you're jabbing and switching it up and going more with those 1-2s, you again begin to surprise them a bit more, and they have to kind of concern themselves with what version of that left hand they're going to get. This, of course, will lead to scoring some points, damaging Taylor in the process, but also then get to those combinations because you'll have obviously landed a couple of shots in the first place. So it's all good things if you're Amanda Serrano and you're leading with that left hand from time to time. I would also say dig to the body. And this can be something that I think Serrano benefits from, number one, because she's a decent body puncher, of course, but number two, because it does a couple of things for her. Number one, it can potentially bring Taylor's momentum and more specifically her activity level down a peg or two. She has a great engine on her, but if you could take some of that away, especially early on, that's obviously going to be a good thing for you if you're Serrano. But the other thing is, if you have any concerns about taking punches from a person who has been at lightweight a little bit longer than Serrano has, this is going to potentially take some of the wind out of her sails in that regard as well. Zaps the power out of you when you consistently get hit to the body. So it benefits Serrano to score, benefits her to beat her up, slow her down, and potentially zap some of the power. Of course, the body attack I think will be important, certainly important in this fight. Now, while it might be close, I am picking Serrano to win this historic fight. I think it might be close as both are kind of hesitant in the first few rounds of this fight, but a fight will break out inevitably, and while they may go back and forth for a few frames, I think Serrano will take over a bit more in those kind of middle frames due to these exchanges and kind of the pacing and tempo of the fight. The harder shots, the straighter shots of Serrano will begin to take their toll on Taylor as she tries landing those kind of wilder shots that she can sometimes have, and this during those exchanges will only allow for Serrano to have more openings. I don't think Taylor gets put down, but I can see Serrano busting her up a bit in the latter frames, and perhaps the age of Taylor catching up to her in those final rounds. That left hand around the guard will be key for Serrano to kind of pulling off this game plan that I can see her pulling off. Still, due to there being only 10 frames and only 2 minutes per frame and both having some success and kind of keeping it close, it could be a very close call on the cards. Still, in my opinion, if it's to be called fair after the action, I have Amanda Serrano winning via split or majority decision. Bit of a bonus pick here. We have Liam Smith versus Jessie Vargas on the undercard of Serrano versus Taylor, and kind of a crossroads battle for the two. It's a very good fight, perhaps a possible fight of the night winner, depending on the sort of action that develops, of course. Both need the win, both are former titleists, possibly near the tail ends of their primes, and both have been in there with some of the biggest names in the sport, so they certainly have big fight experience, to say the very least. And that's true of both, but it really only comes down to this fight for them. So it could make for a very, very interesting and even encounter. So I'll kind of break that one down a little bit here. For Smith, I think he needs to let the fight build and apply pressure going down the stretch, especially. Use that left hook to try to get some damage going and then kind of put some punches together. He's a little more voluminous a puncher than Vargas in that respect. Vargas is more of a combination puncher, so you just got to kind of throw a little bit of the quality out the window perhaps and go more for that quantity if you're Smith, and I think you'll have some success. You'll just have to be sure you're watching out for that straight left hand of Vargas because that can pay dividends for him, and that's one thing defensively Smith will have to look out for, as he has been hurt with left hands in the past. And if you're Vargas, I want to say get loose early. Throw that straight left, as I mentioned, with authority, and don't get pushed back. Smith is the bigger man, and that's certainly not something you're going to want to let him happen. The size of Smith cannot determine this fight. You have to be willing to move when you need to move, and you need to be willing to push him back when it calls for that as well. This, of course, will allow for those combination shots to get off a bit more because you're not having to worry about someone smothering your work, and that can only benefit you if you're Vargas, in my opinion. Now, in terms of my pick here, under different circumstances, I could see picking Vargas, but he last fought in February of 2020, and it was a loss to a smaller man in Mikey Garcia. That just does not bode well for him in this particular case, in my opinion. And outside of a win over a beaten to powder Humberto Soto in 2019, Vargas hasn't had a half-decent win since Saddam Ali in 2016. These are just not good signs for him. Still, he's up for a fight, and if Smith is slipping too far, which could be the case, Vargas could make a decent fight of it and take advantage of it. My pick, however, is that Smith starts slow but quickly picks up the rounds as he begins to bully and punish Vargas down the stretch, especially in those kind of middle rounds leading into those later rounds. Smith isn't a huge puncher, so I expect it will go the distance, but I think he wins a solid decision. Liam Smith via unanimous decision. Now, the betting odds for these fights are actually relatively close for both of them. In the Taylor-Serrano fight, you have both coming in at a minus 110, which basically makes it an even money fight. Don't need to give you a lot of advice on that one, I wouldn't say. It's pretty much a simple call. You think Taylor's going to win? Bet on Taylor. You think Serrano's going to win? Do the same. It's an even money fight. They're the best in boxing when you can get them, especially in these bigger, more meaningful fights. So you certainly have your pick of the litter here, so to speak. It just kind of depends where you're leaning. Obviously, in my case, that'd be Serrano, but even I'm saying that it's going to be a relatively close fight. So just kind of the advice I would give is lead sort of with discretion in terms of bet size. Maybe go something smaller to medium on your kind of bankroll, but that's obviously up to you. In terms of that second fight, you have Vargas coming in at a slight underdog, actually a 2-1 underdog, really, at a plus 190, with Smith coming in at a minus 250. Again, decent odds for Vargas if you're interested in picking up that kind of slight underdog with maybe some money that you're willing to lose, so to speak. Smith, little less value in that one, but still relatively close odds. Maybe something you could parlay if you're looking to do that. Perhaps where the money here is on this one is something like an over-under, kind of depending on what round you could buy there. So that kind of is up to you. But if you're a believer in Vargas, certainly some decent odds for you there. So maybe something you want to look at there as well. In any event, my prediction record heading into the weekend is 15-4-0 with 3 exact. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts, predictions, so on and so forth. Of course, who are your pick for these two fights? You got Taylor, you got Serrano, you got Smith, you got Vargas. Would love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Please be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter at jcalderon_JOB. And you can email me at jakeunboxing@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you there as well. Also, be sure to check out jakeunboxing.com for schedule, results, betting odds, rankings, all that good stuff. And in the description box, I will have a link to my most recent edition of Fighter Grades, as well as a piece I did on whether or not Tyson Fury will be retiring. Spoiler alert, I don't think so. So you can check those links out down in the comments, or rather in the description box below. And as always, until next time.